Hey there, La Porte. Welcome back to the Plugged In La Porte podcast. I'm your host, Nate Loucks, and it feels great to be back behind the mic after our break. We've missed bringing you the stories and voices that make our community tick. And we're coming back strong with an episode focused on La Porte's future. Today we're sitting down again with City Engineer Nick Minich and Director of Community Development Craig Phillips to explore the projects reshaping our city. From the US 35 reconstruction and downtown walkability improvements to new solar initiatives and trail developments, we'll get an inside look at how La Porte is evolving to meet the needs of our community. Now, before we dive in, I want to thank our amazing sponsor, the La Porte Economic Advancement Partnership. They're doing an incredible work to drive economic growth and community development in La Porte. If you want to know more about them, you can find them at laportepartnership.com. And hey, if you're enjoying the podcast, would you do us a huge favor? Take a moment and rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback helps more people discover these important conversations about our community. And feel free to look me up on social media, give me suggestions on episodes, and maybe questions that you want me to ask different leaders and community people here in La Porte. Remember, our motto is stay curious, stay connected, and stay plugged in. Let's get started with today's conversation about the future of La Porte. Welcome, Nick and Craig. How are you?
Good.
Doing well, thanks.
Thanks.
All right. It's been a couple months at least since we've had you in here, and I know it seems like with community planning or community development and city engineering, there's always new stuff going on. So I want to get some updates on what you guys are doing right now. And both of you guys look tired, and you told me beforehand that you had a grant due this week, correct?
True, yeah. We have our EPA has brownfield grants on an annual basis, so we try and submit those every chance we get, and we put one in again this year.
So while we talk about that, because I want to talk a little bit about the unique funding nature of projects that you guys do. It's not that, the city obviously has a budget, right? And I don't know, $22 million. I don't know what the city budget is these days, but it was roughly around there a couple years ago. But that doesn't mean that covers every department. It doesn't mean it covers every project. In fact, it probably doesn't. And so the city has to go out and find funds either through foundations or, like the Health Foundation or state funds or federal funds. So explain, Nick, I guess I'll ask you this question. Explain a little bit how you guys get your funding.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. People don't necessarily realize the engineering department has a budget grand total of $0 to actually do projects. So we're really
what's that again?
$0.
So if you add that with how much, do you get zero again?
Yeah. So I mean, if we had 10 times the budget we had to do projects, it'd still be $0. But what happens is really the engineering department is a department of employees that help push projects and find funds to make that happen. So when we talk about things like street paving, anytime we do street paving, that comes at the expense of something else. So our street department is funded out of essentially the same funds that we use for street paving. So less funding for the street department, more funding for paving. But we have to find that balance. And then, if it's a utility project, we need to coordinate with utilities to find funds for the project. It really is it's a challenge. I mean, we don't, like I said, have money up front to do a project. We have to find that funding every time we need to move something forward.
Craig, how long have you been doing this work? Not here in La Porte, but in total?
25 years.
How has funding changed in the 25 years you've been involved with municipal work? Has it changed? Is it getting harder to get money? Is it just where you're getting money changed, or is it more competitive?
It's about the same. I mean, I think the sources are similar. The amount that's available from those sources ebbs and flows depending upon funding cycles from those various agencies. But it's about the same as far as our ability to get then the amount of funding that's available from each of those sources.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what's going on. Can you both provide a brief overview of, and we'll start with you, Craig, of major projects currently underway in La Porte that you're kind of excited about, including maybe US 35 or whatever things that you're excited about getting going right now?
So from my standpoint, I'm very focused on housing. We have, as I think people have seen with a number of ribbon cuttings and different events, we have a lot of housing-related projects that are happening in La Porte right now. So a lot of my focus has been on facilitating different housing projects, working with the developers, working on finding sources of funding on the city side to help make those projects happen, It's all across the board. We're working on projects from affordable housing up to market rate and even luxury housing, depending on what the need is and where in the community. So a lot of my focus has been on that. Speaking of grants, we always are seeking opportunities for helping fund those projects as well with grants. And so I've been very, very busy in the past couple months working on securing some funds for housing to make infrastructure possible for those projects as well.
Can I ask you a question, and Nick, then I'll have you answer that question. But like, I see this online quite a bit where there's some concern, right, that much of the new housing that's getting built or the projects, the larger projects that are coming, like the one on Seavers Road or whatever, are in that 300,000, maybe a little higher range. For those that maybe aren't in that range to afford a house, what hope do they have? Is the hope that maybe some people will clear up some of the houses that are, in that lower range? Or what do you have to say to them for hope for housing in the future?
Well, I'll say two things. Unfortunately, a starter home these days is $300,000. So an entry-level starter home is $300,000, regardless. But there are other opportunities that are coming in La Porte in the event that we're able to get some funding put in place that we've worked with partners to secure. Hopefully in about a week we'll find out if we've gotten what are called low-income housing tax credits that'll allow us to put in a combination of new single-family and townhomes on a few different sites in La Porte. And so that's a project along with the Tibma Bakery project. Those are two projects that are one that's happening as we speak, and another one that we're hoping will kick off here very soon. That will be a different level. It'll be a level below in terms of the cost of the housing compared to those houses that are out in the Hunter Woods Park Street development, for example.
Yeah, and to your point there, I think when you say starter home, I often think starter home is the first home. What you're saying is for new construction, right?
Yeah.
Because I was talking to a builder not that long ago, and a local builder here, and he said right now it's about 300 to 350 a square foot, right? Construction is for them. And so, and there's not a lot of builders, right? And so there's not a ton of builders, and my family's been in construction for generations, not anymore, but they were in concrete for years, and the cost has gotten significantly higher to build. And so, like you said, it is to get 1,000, which means the math is to get 1,000 square foot, you've got $300,000 house. And so the idea of building a new house for $200,000, unless it is subsidized by a source, which there's not a lot of those right now that are trying to subsidize those type of low-income housing, right?
But we are working with a developer currently that has the ability to secure that kind of financing to assist in that regard. And like I said, hopefully, fingers crossed, in about a week, we'll hopefully get good news that we're able to move forward with a project that provides some additional options for people in La Porte that maybe can't afford that $200,000 or that $300,000 starter home.
Mm-hmm, for sure. All right, Nick, what about you? Can you provide a kind of an overview of some of the projects you're working on right now that maybe you're excited about?
Yeah, just kind of building off of what Craig was talking with housing. I mean, it's something that I've really tasked with my assistant director, Tucker, on, and he works very closely with the water department. But what people don't always realize is we have to be as efficient as possible. So if you want to keep that house at $300,000, the right mix of land and utilities and everything has to be there too. So, because to go to that, if they're paying $250,000 more for utility development, then that's going to be shared amongst the cost of those houses. So instead of $300,000, it's going to be $310,000. Correct? Yeah. Exactly. So with the Hunter Woods project off of Seavers Road and Park Street. Essentially what we were able to do is look at the overall infrastructure of the city and look at ways that we can improve our water system, improve our sewer system, and then it also benefits that development too. And in doing so, the city was able to take on installation of water main. The city was able to take on kind of supplying some materials because, again, it'll have a long-term benefit to the city's utility network. So I think it's just kind of interesting, like, how do you get a house at $300,000, or maybe can you get a little lower? Well, you have to be creative and figure out how to efficiently provide the land and utilities for that development. So
does this ever happen? And feel free to say it doesn't, but to where again, you've got the infrastructure cost of getting a development. You've got the engineering costs of you've got all these different kind of stakeholders that are coming in that all need paid, all these things, where you can find funding for one of those things. For instance, you can find maybe a grant for infrastructure development, or you have some money in a budget for infrastructure development, but you don't have money for land development or something like that. Does that happen then? So that's how you say, okay, let's figure out what avenues we can provide help for this and see if we can.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we try and do is we look at, there is a total cost to the project. When a developer puts together a pro forma, they're looking at every aspect of the project that they're going to have to put in funds. Well, some of those funds do involve the public right-of-way, and some of those funds involve public utilities, public infrastructure, that if everything was perfect, we'd be able to say, nope, developers, that's all on you. But really, having new development in our community, having a grouping of $300,000 new construction homes, that has a positive impact on the entire community from a property tax perspective. So we see a benefit. It's new users on our sewer system. It's new users on our water system. New development and really infill development in the city gives us a benefit. So when the city can partner to improve the overall system, really it does start to change it has a positive impact on the whole community. So it really ends up being justified to try and make this type of thing happen so that we can all see, lower taxes and better infrastructure.
So when it comes to development, housing development, you can both answer this if you have any input. There is a lot of frustration online, and I know you guys probably do a good job of keeping boundaries of not necessarily always reading it, but I'm sure it gets to your desk, and if not, it's going to get to you here. There is some frustration about this online. Maybe what's one thing that you wish people, there's maybe a piece of the puzzle people aren't seeing that you wish they did. What would that be, or what would you tell them maybe to, because when people are frustrated, I like to listen, right? I want to know what is the frustration, but sometimes the frustration is born out of a misunderstanding. So is there something there that you could think that you would like to tell the listeners?
Well, I think, there's always a misunderstanding, miscommunication when people talk about low-income housing versus market rate housing versus workforce housing.
We talk about affordable housing.
What
do all they mean, right?
That's a challenge, and I think we have to really understand there are market forces behind residential construction, no matter what, whether it's affordable or market rate or whatever it is. There are costs that are associated with it that they're out of our control completely. And we have to understand the market's going to dictate a lot. Even when you look at a low-income housing type project, if there's any funds attached to it to help bring that cost down, it doesn't change that the cost is still high right now because the cost of construction is high. So we can't magically make housing go back to the way it was a decade ago.
2 decades ago.
That's
even
one of the most important things I think for people to understand is that if you want to build a house that's under $300,000, period, it requires subsidy. So that's going to be in the form of either what are called low-income housing tax credits or some sort of subsidy from us locally. And so there are relatively few opportunities to find people that are interested in doing those projects to begin with, and even fewer opportunities to find that funding for the subsidy. So anytime you see us working on one of those projects, there's always either federal, state, or some sort of maybe other foundation money or something like that involved in helping make those projects happen, because it's just not possible, as Nick said, to build those units any cheaper than that at this point. So that's something that's very important to understand. And we hear sometimes, it gets back to us obviously through channels, that the affordability issue, but just that we're building stuff that's all at the high end, and that's just simply not true. We're actually not fulfilling a need that we have in our community to provide for, the upper level management that wants to live in La Porte. There are no opportunities except for perhaps a handful of existing homes on the existing home market, but even those are limited and far and few between. I mean, we've had some experiences with some of our partners where they've had some challenges finding housing.
Yeah, I
and
do
that's
know
a problem for us.
I
as
know
a
of
community.
a couple executives here in the community that live in Valpo, and not because they didn't want to live here, but because, again, now it's hard to have sympathy for people that are looking for $600,000 or $700,000 houses. However, the reality is shouldn't we want everyone to live here, right? Yeah. We certainly don't want a community where people that can afford housing can't live here. But we also want a community where people that want higher income housing can live here as well. I think all of those can exist together, and I hope you guys agree with that. But I do believe that to be the case. To illustrate some of this, and again, because I'm so interconnected to the construction industry because of my family. When Loucks Concrete Specialist was putting in houses in the 90s and early 2000s, we were doing 5 basements a week. They were pulling hundreds of new housing permits in the county. And I don't know what they did last year, how many new housing permits, but last time I checked, it was dozens, not hundreds. And so, and then I was having this conversation with my father about, we were going through just naming all of the contractors that existed here in the county that are no longer here. And to be fair, a lot of them got out when the economy really took a tank in the late, in 2008, 2009. They went to the mills. They said, listen, I can make more income doing that. And then they never came back. And so then when you only have 3 or 4, construction people building houses, then they get to charge a lot more money, right? Because there's fewer of them that can actually build. And so it's just a very complicated economic and community development issue.
And we are supporting those local developers
for sure.
And builders that are, doing those projects. I mean, we just had a groundbreaking the other day for another phase of Whispering Meadows, for example. Obviously one of our local builders, Minich builders.
But many of those are smaller builders, and they can only take on a couple houses a year, right?
Yeah. And we are starting to work with, regional builders as well, because the interest is starting to increase in our community. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as more people move out of Chicago and want to, come out to Northwest Indiana. They want options. And then when you see the increase in the number of employers that we're going to have in the area, there's going to be even more need for housing going forward. We have some substantial projects that are coming along here in La Porte, but also in neighboring community, and that's going to impact us pretty substantially, and we need to be prepared to help provide some of the housing necessary for those projects. That's a big focus of ours as well.
Yeah, I used to joke that it was probably a decade or two that the high school building trades class was the only spec builder in our community. So that we didn't have, we had so many custom home builders, but we didn't have a lot of builders and developers going out and speculatively starting construction projects. Even Mitch Ficus and his development has been just, chugging along for quite a while now, and they're producing a lot of really great homes that fit a lot of budgets, that fit a lot of people's needs. It's wonderful. I think they usually start a home either when it's sold, or when they start a home, it's usually sold before they, get too far along on the house. So even their situation, they're not doing a lot of kind of speculative home building. We're starting to lean on some of the more regional builders to do that aspect.
Is that on 18th Street? Is that a Steiner home? Is that a spec home there?
That would be a spec home, yeah. So they don't have a buyer necessarily. They're gonna start building some and see what the market looks like, and then just keep going from there. So.
All right, let's move on. Nick, could you elaborate on the solar projects La Porte is pursuing and how they fit into the city's kind of sustainability goals?
Yeah, so we actually applied for a grant. It was kind of a tag on to a grant through the state to the EPA for some community solar projects. We have those projects kind of ready to go. We're continually looking for other grants because the state wasn't awarded the funds to do that. But it really is important for us. We want to make sure that we have just a resilient grid as far as power is concerned. We talk about things like the Microsoft project, and everybody knows they're a big energy user. That's not even really what we're looking at. I think the energy industry fill that market. But the more we can start looking at, it's really a push to have more resiliency, to look at microgrid opportunities, to look at how can we potentially develop the former landfill north of Fox Park. Could we put solar on that? Like I mentioned previously, we're working on some brownfield redevelopment. So you see Newport Landing developing. The next section of Newport Landing is that gap between the former landfill and the current development. Boy, it'd be really great if we could get some grants to add solar to the landfill to power things in that area. Battery storage, different things like that are really key as we move forward. Right now, our focus has been, when we submit for grants, on city facilities. So looking at how can we reduce the cost to our residents by reducing our tax burden by having less energy costs going into our buildings. But that has a benefit across.
Because the city, right? It's like any of our budgets, right? You either need to make more money, you need to have more revenue, or you need to cut costs. And so potentially this could help cut costs so that you can use that revenue for other things. But it has been interesting. We had Representative Pressel on an episode, and he talked about, because there are some people that don't like solar, but he talked about the need for a diversified power grid, right? It's not because you're going to get rid of any of the other sources. It's that we rely too heavily on one source. And it was interesting. I don't know if you saw a recent article, but ExxonMobil, recently, their CEO recently, said, with the new administration, they're hoping that they continue to fund and support these diversified power projects because they don't plan to fully go back to where they were. They don't want to go back to where they were. They want to, as a company, continue to diversify how they find and provide energy as well. So, I think it is the future, whether we like it or not.
NIPSCO, as a provider, as an energy provider for our region, is diversifying its portfolio in terms of how it goes about producing the power that we need, the energy that we need, to power all the all of our homes and all of the projects we're talking about here.
Well,
so they're getting more involved in solar and wind and hydro and things like that. So
and they're going to do that regardless of whether or not the city gets involved or not. That's where they're going.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so we lost out on that grant. Really, the main recipient of those funds.
For our listeners, that was Nick Minich's phone. I am so disappointed. We will have a conversation after the episode and fully reprimand him.
On the phone.
On the phone. I'll call you.
No, so we lost out on solar, and the main recipient of the funds ended up being heat pumps in the Northeast. So they're looking at making houses more efficient, essentially, by having heat pumps installed versus us looking at microgrid and adding solar. So it's a little bit of a reminder when we look at our entire network of power, we have to be looking at how we're consuming it. Same thing with water, same thing with a lot of resources we have. It's not enough to just build solar and find other opportunities for energy. We also need to make sure that the buildings we're building are energy efficient, that we're retrofitting buildings to be more energy efficient, and continue to do that. They call it demand side management. So the more we can manage the demand of power, that means less resources have to go into creating new power.
Craig, I hear one of the things I see online is conversations and confusion about TIF districts. And I know that's kind of one of the things that you talk about in community meetings and stuff like this. Can you explain a little bit what a TIF for our listeners is? TIF. It stands for something that Craig can explain, but how the city uses these, and maybe why you think they're important.
Sure, absolutely. It's one of the most important tools that municipalities have at their disposal here in Indiana. TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing. It's not a simple concept to describe, but as simple as I can put it, basically what happens is the city determines an area of the city that they would like to capture all of the taxes in that particular area that are already collected. It does not involve a tax increase, to be clear. I think a lot of people think that when there's a TIF district, there's an additional tax, there's an increase in taxes. It's not.
You're taking the pot of taxes that's already
collected in that area, and we're collecting that, and we reinvest that back in that area. So we're required by law to reinvest the dollars that we collect from those taxes back into that area that has been TIFed.
So to clarify then, so instead of putting in the larger pot of the city, you're
Correct.
saying any of the taxes in that TIF are going to go back into that area,
into that geographic area
that have the boundaries.
Just the increment that is
The agreed upon increment or whatever.
So I'm sorry, let me be clear. So you start with the day one at the level that's currently being collected. And then from that day forward, as tax base grows based on growth and development, that amount.
Oh, okay.
That's why this is
anything over.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, anything over the base that was agreed.
Anything over the base that existed at the day the TIF district was established is captured in it's called increment.
Yep.
And that is reinvested back into that area.
Gotcha.
The remaining base continues to flow to the city, the county, the library.
So they're still contributing to the overall goals of the city, and
exactly
like everyone else is. But
so
anything that grows
above that base is what's captured and reinvested back into that area. And so there are a lot of projects that wouldn't happen but for the ability to have us invest in those projects.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, American Signature, when it was built, was established as a TIF district, and so when we started that project, it was basically the value of the land.
That's out on Fail Road, right?
Yeah, just off of Fail Road. It was just the value of the land that it sits on, but everything that was built on that property and that small industrial park outside of it has everything that's happened since then. That value has been captured and reinvested. Sometimes we commit to reinvesting that back to a particular project, and sometimes it goes into the overall area. Mm-hmm. And so it can be in the form of incentive, it can be in the form of infrastructure development, and that sort of investment. So
what have you used that TIF money for over there?
That's been a combination. It's been reinvested into that project because that project wouldn't have happened
if
we didn't commit to making that project, participating in the overall cost of that project.
So it repays the city for its investment into that project as well then, right? The increment there. So
the increment that's captured is directly put back into that project to a certain percentage, and then the remainder of that is captured by us and reinvested in that area and surrounding area.
Okay.
So, and that's a project that we have paid off that particular investment that we committed to for the actual project itself. So now that project is helping us invest in the area around it more than just the project originally.
So we have what, 6 TIFs? What do we have?
6. Is
39 North a TIF?
Yes.
Okay. And is that just
a new TIF?
As I say, you established that as a TIF.
Yes. 39 North is a new TIF, and then we have Boyd Boulevard, which was set up in response to the Microsoft project.
Okay.
So those are our two newest
TIFs.
And we started out at 0.
Okay.
So we're starting out at 0 based on the current base. And everything that happens in those areas from this point forward, that additional investment that people make in those properties will capture and reinvest.
Okay, great. And so let's talk a little bit then about 39 North. Just announced a senior housing project out there. That's I know that was in the works, right? That was in the works. That wasn't just because of
Wasn't going to happen though without.
It wasn't going to happen without it, but
right.
I know that was essentially waiting on the
correct
annexation to happen. Any other developments? Anything going on out there that you can tell the listeners? I mean, are you still pushing a lot of developments? What are you hoping to see out there?
Yeah, there's another project that's happening that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the investment that we're making in 39 North. Is the IST logistics project, for example.
What's that?
It's a cross dock facility for the food industry. For food grade plastics are offloaded from trucks onto rail and vice versa at that location for a particular set of users in the food. In the food processing industry. Then you also have you have a residential project that'll likely come back as a result of that investment that we're making in 39 North.
A project you guys haven't announced or anything, but you're working on, right?
It was previously discussed in the county. It was townhomes and things like that were proposed out there. But then there are other large vacant parcels that are out in that area that we anticipate future development on. South Shore Freight, for example, owns a significant parcel that's immediately adjacent to the railroad, obviously, and it's also adjacent to the toll road. And 39, it's a perfectly positioned parcel for economic development. And we we have turned away opportunities in the past for that parcel because the infrastructure wasn't in place, to make those projects happen.
Well,
now that is in place.
We haven't necessarily.
No, the county previously. We as partners, I should say, collectively, the county.
Projects have been turned away.
Projects have been turned away in the past because the infrastructure wasn't available to make those happen, and now it is. And so we definitely expect an uptick in that development out there.
And Nick, can you get an update on kind of what are? I know there's a lot of infrastructure work that the city has agreed upon, with the Conservancy District and all of these things to annex it. What is an update on that? What's a timeline on that?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things is providing a water tower. Water tower will help with a lot of things. There's also an additional groundwater storage at the supply side. So those two projects are really some of the key aspects of the overall plan. The city, if we haven't closed, we're very close to closing on a piece of property that we're acquiring from South Shore Freight. So that'll be the water tower location. We are working with a consultant to complete the design and bid the project. We're looking at about a year out is my guess. Just
to start or to?
Well, they were closer to 2 years out to get a water tower. As supply chain issues haven't necessarily completely resolved, and water towers are one of those.
I just say they're just not on the shelves at Lowe's.
Yeah, it's
there's
hard
only
to find them.
There's only a few suppliers of water towers out there.
Menards has them, but
well, you really got to wait for that 11% off.
Yes.
Put it in a bag.
Yeah. That's exactly our problem. We can't fit it in the bag, so we've got to go this other route, which is going to take a little time. But it's in the works, and I think the biggest thing is. We have the land, we have the studies and the understanding of what needs to happen, and we're at that point where if the order hasn't gone in for the actual tower, it's going in shortly.
And you have the funding.
And we have the funding.
Okay,
yes.
so it's all essentially just a waiting game right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for our 39 North listeners,
less waiting and more slow forward progression.
Yeah. Little things happen, but obviously when you order a water tower and, they say it's going to take a year to get there, there's not much you can do.
We're doing everything we can to prepare to install those water improvements. And, it's just a matter of when those suppliers can provide those various elements to us, and we're ready to go as far as the construction and installation of those.
And will those residents see anything else happening out there over the next year or anything?
Well, it's kind of taking over the services. That's a big part of it. But then I kind of want to mention, projects take time to develop and build, and the annexation of the portion that is currently in the city really didn't happen long ago, and the agreement that we finalized with 39 North Conservancy is a month old now, and we've already started. We have our consultants. We're ordering tower. This is a very fast
securing
pace.
the financing.
We have the financing secured. Yep. I don't always see government work this fast. To my frustration.
So you're saying it's actually going pretty quick.
It's going pretty quick comparatively to the development of infrastructure other places. I've seen a lot of focus put on this and some priorities shifted to make sure that the funding was in place and the project was going to happen sooner than a lot of projects would happen of this scale.
It's a good point, though. For those of us that aren't involved in the trenches, it's hard to know what projects like that take, right? What timeline is, and if it's only a year and it usually takes 2 years, you just saved a year. But for us, it's just, why is it taking so long? Why is it a year, right?
Yeah.
Well, it should be 2 years, and it's a year, and it's good to know kind of what are the industry regular kind of wait times and things like that. And so kudos to you guys for hopefully getting efficient government working. I want to talk a little bit about, because I like to talk about projects that people see. So much of what you guys are doing and do are, I'm not saying sewers aren't fun. I'm just saying it is one of those things where you invest a lot of money into things that happen underneath the ground or in spaces that people don't always notice and see. All equally important. And I don't want to minimize the importance of...
Less fun than sewers would be not having sewers.
For sure.
Okay,
For
so
sure. And honestly, I
things
don't
in
want to minimize
perspective.
that because, again, I want good sewers, right? It's just a lot of people want to know what new buildings, what new business, these kind of things, right? But I do want to talk about, I want to talk a little bit about the LincolnWALK project because this is a project that people will notice. This is something they're going to see that's different on Lincoln Way, I believe next year or...
We'll see. Our goal is to get it in as soon as possible.
All right. Why don't you explain this project?
Yeah.
Again, it's called the LincolnWALK project.
So we've spent years trying to figure out how to really take a massive project and get it to move forward. And it's just so much to push when it comes to
What massive project?
looking at our transportation network and making sure that vehicles, different types of vehicles, are where they belong, where we can be successful.
Okay, you're being very diplomatic here, but we all know what you're talking about. We're trying to
trying to
figure
move-
out how to get the traffic around Lincoln Way in a way that's responsible, in a way that doesn't necessarily hinder too much, but also allows our businesses on Lincoln Way to have a little more privacy, a little more walkability, and hopefully flourish more. Yeah.
Exactly. We want to make sure that semis that want to access manufacturing on the east side of the city do not have to go down Lincoln Way to get there. Right now, we can't move that massive object fast enough or efficiently, or we don't have the funds to do that today. And our downtown businesses deserve something. They deserve to have more. They deserve to have customers and employees and themselves able to safely access those buildings and not fear that if they park in front of the building, they're going to lose a mirror, or their kids have to, they can only get out on one side of the car, and things like that. You have to change your mindset every time you go downtown because we have a significant amount of commercial traffic on Lincoln Way. The challenge of moving that massive project of shifting how we see trucks access the city, we're not going to get there tomorrow. So we want to make sure that we do something now, and that would be what we call tactical urbanism. So essentially it's looking at a near-term, low-cost, not permanent solution, but it also gives us a vision of what we could have. So what we're doing with LincolnWALK is we're trying to make Lincoln Way a little bit more walkable, really. We want to make pedestrians feel more comfortable. There'll be some added benefits, I hope, to this also. But essentially what we're doing is you see on our side streets where we have angled parking or even parallel parking, our ramps at intersections kind of bump out, and those parking areas are protected. We don't have that on Lincoln Way. We don't have protected parking areas. Well, when you have those, you also shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians. So what we're doing is
instead of 30 or 40 feet, whatever it is, it would maybe 30 feet or 35 feet or something.
So essentially, the parking lane on Lincoln Way is about 8 feet wide, right? You have one on each side. So essentially, you have an extra 16 feet you have to walk right now. So what we're doing is we're using striping and then some flexible delineators, which are just kind of those short reflective posts. And we're using those to start to bump out that crossing distance, to bump out those intersections. We have plenty of issues with trucks currently trying to make turns.
Lots of
downtown.
curbing, lots of curbs that get hit.
We are not going to be building new curbs today. Like, that's just not something INDOT is going to be in favor of. But we can start to kind of paint areas that maybe vehicles should reconsider driving through. Make the turn within the actual travel lane, and by painting those areas, so we'll have a white stripe and then the flexible delineators, and then the inside of that will all be, you guessed it, orange.
I'm sure the mayor's got input there. It's got to be orange.
Well, we're really limited. So INDOT has specific rules about colors, and orange is a little bit of a stretch for them. It's either white or yellow, but they were accepting of orange
because it's like at least a construction color.
And I think it will end up kind of looking nice and let people know, like, okay, there's an area here that is adjacent to the parking lane that really it's not for cars. This area shouldn't necessarily be for cars. So it's an awareness. And when you're driving down Lincoln Way with the reflective delineator posts and the paint, if you're looking down Lincoln Way, essentially Lincoln Way starts to narrow by that 16 feet.
At the crossing.
Yeah,
it's
visual. It's psychology, but it also starts to just chip away at that. What can we have? How can we look at our downtown a little bit differently? What could it look like in the future when we start to find alternatives to Lincoln Way for our commercial vehicles?
That's exciting. I think, again, for as many things as Brett Benversi and our community kind of team that does with the events that we have going downtown, there is so much stuff there that the collective does with the farmers market, that the safer it can be for people to cross, and the more awareness that our drivers have of these kind of things, it's a good thing. But you mentioned something, and Craig, I'll get your opinion on this. So I don't think a lot of people appreciate and understand that when you do, Lincoln Way is the most important road that we have coming through our city. The second most is probably Indiana Avenue. And we don't fully control all of those, do we? And so, there are multiple stakeholders on all of those things. So it's not that the city can just say, we're going to do this.
Yeah, that's not our jurisdiction. It's the state's jurisdiction. Those are state highways, state and federal highways, and INDOT manages the federal highways as well. So we have to work in conjunction with and get the permission of INDOT to do anything that we want to do in those areas that they control within their rights of way, as we call it. And so that's what Nick's talking about, chipping away, is working with them on the things that they're willing to approve in the short term, and then hopefully starting to change their mindset as we are also able to put the funding necessary together to be able to create these other opportunities, these are options that we're talking about. So we're embarking on, Nick and I are leading an effort right now to take a look at that longer term overall comprehensive transportation solution. We're kicking off, as we speak, the city's comprehensive and transportation plan. So people will start hearing more about opportunities for public input, stakeholder input on that plan. And so we're talking about the overall transportation network in terms of missing links that help make traffic flow better in certain areas of our community, especially like on the north side of the tracks, is a real challenge. There's some missing segments there that we've identified that we think are important. But that alternate truck route in the short term or the medium term, depending on what you look at in terms of funding, to get trucks off of Lincoln Way, provide a different opportunity, and then also the long term of continuing to explore and work on, the north-south corridor, for example. So one thing we're looking at is shifting traffic onto a combination of Washington Street as in combination with perhaps an old railroad grade that's an abandoned old railroad grade. So that we can avoid impacting a neighborhood that is further east.
And just to be clear, INDOT does an excellent job at what they're tasked to do. The Indiana Department of Transportation is tasked with managing state and federal highways. Their concern isn't necessarily local streets, and that's not their job. They are the driving force behind getting everything to its destination, going from one manufacturing center to another, if with different components and parts. It's the movement of goods is so key.
So when you ask them a question about aesthetics, right, about what a project should look like or striping or something like that, are they that concerned?
The truck needs to get there on time.
That's what they're worried about, right? That's what they're more worried about.
And safety.
They're willing to let us invest in aesthetics, but it's at our cost.
Exactly. And also, I'm sure you have to really put the project in front of them, right? Because they're looking at a broader sense of how do we make things more efficient? Right? Locally in our county, you've seen INDOT doing some roundabouts and things like this that are trying to make travel more efficient to get to things. And so, like you said, does this have to deal with efficiency, or does this have to, and they're good at that. But
I always tell people they are all about mobility. They're all about getting things moving. We care. So if 90% of what they focus on is mobility, of getting a truck from A to B, we focus 90% on accessibility. Our local businesses and residents need to have access. Customers need to have access to businesses. We care about the accessibility of every business on Lincoln Way. They care about the mobility of the vehicles that need to use Lincoln Way to get from A to B.
But they will work with us. They will work with us as long as we provide the funding necessary to do aesthetic improvements. So we're also very concerned about how these projects look. And so one example is in the short term, people are going to initially be impacted for a while US 35 Indiana Avenue gets completely rebuilt south of Lincoln Way.
Yeah, and I don't know if people really fully appreciate, this is not putting more road down. This is actually rebuilding the whole thing, correct?
And making substantial aesthetic improvements. And I'll let Nick expand on what that includes. But things that we as a city have identified that we think are a priority to make that stretch of roadway look nicer for our community. So we're working with NDOT, and they said, "Sure, we'll let you do that. You're gonna pay the cost of doing that." But maybe Nick can expand exactly. He's the project manager on the city side for that.
Craig, I think for our listeners to kind of give you an illustration. You might say that we want this lighting pole to go up, and they say, okay, the budget for that we'll contribute is $90.
What we would have already paid,
but $90 is obviously low. But what we want is $180, and they're going to say that's fine. We're going to pay $90. You contribute the rest, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
NDOT is great at partnering on things like that. And again, they've been really wonderful to work with on so many of our projects. Indiana Ave is a great example of a partnership. So initially we were trying to find funding because if they were going to redo the road, we wanted to make sure sidewalks were done. But after a little research, so what's interesting is NDOT's ADA transition plan basically says the ramp where it meets the road is their responsibility, and everything else is the responsibility of the local community. But Indiana Avenue was in existence before the highway was in existence. So US 35 took over Indiana Avenue as a highway. So because of that, it actually ended up being the state's responsibility to also fix the sidewalks. So everything from the back of sidewalk to the back of sidewalk is being reconstructed, and that includes everything underground. And looking at that, so NDOT would be most concerned about making sure that water from the highway gets off of the highway and goes somewhere. Well, we also have areas of combined sewer adjacent to that. So the city is paying for what they call betterment. So essentially the city is upsizing that storm sewer. They're, doing some things with sanitary.
While you're digging there, let us fix some things while you're doing it.
Yep.
Right?
So there's a cost share component to that. And really, I mean, we should be paying for our infrastructure, and we are, and they're paying for the things that they manage. It's been a great partnership, like I said. Even the trees, and we worked with our arborist and their consultant to come up with a tree removal and planting plan that, it could have stalled the project had we not done that just because of the environmental review. But by us having a solid plan, I think that's what kind of kept the project on track at one point. Some lighting. We really wanted to have
well-lit Indiana Avenue.
Well, and there's been a push to have some kind of historic lighting through our Indiana Avenue Historic District.
I think it's a national historic district too, right? So for sure.
So we were able to build on kind of what Craig's doing with a pattern book for what downtown will look like in the future, and we were able to pull that down Indiana Avenue and start adding some more aesthetic, kind of historic looking lighting as part of the project. So there's a lot of kind of give and take, but again, it's a massive project. It's
also
about a
the
2.5 year project.
That's a good example of the bump outs that we talked about on Lincoln Way. We're doing that. And Nick is working
with infrastructure though, right? Yeah. Not just the paint.
With actual curbing.
Yep.
Yeah. So we were able to very early on. We'd done a gateway corridor study years back, and we were able to take that study and take it to the NDOT's consultants and say, okay, this is what we'd like, but we understand that this isn't necessarily fitting everything you need right now. This is kind of our vision for it, but we were able to take that and really they designed a project that listens to what the needs of the residents on Indiana Ave are, and still is going to move trucks up and down Indiana Ave because that's what they have to do too. But we are adding bump outs at various intersections. So those bump outs protect the parking lane. One of the biggest issues residents on Indiana Ave have are, speeds and things like that, but also very few of them feel comfortable parking their cars on the road. The pavement section is so wide, but a truck doesn't know. They kind of go wherever they go. But by having these bump outs, the parking lanes will be protected in areas and hopefully provide for a better quality of life up and down.
One example is Osborne. Osborne is an Osborne First, that crazy intersection we all know and love. That's one of those examples where physical bump outs are going to be constructed at that intersection that will narrow the crossing distance that people have to cross and create that protected parking lane. So people will be able to see exactly what we're talking about in practice. It will exist as of basically next year. Then that's the same thing we want to do downtown on Lincoln Way, for example.
So we've got housing, we've got infrastructure work, we've got obviously sewer work, we've got all these things happening. I'm so glad that you guys both came in to kind of give us some updates. We could talk a lot more. We didn't even get to Tipton Street Overpass. We got lots of stuff to do, and we'll have you back. But there you have it, LaPorte. What an incredible conversation with Nick and Craig about the transformative projects that are shaping our city's future. From downtown improvements and new trails to sustainable energy initiatives, it's clear that LaPorte is moving forward with purpose and vision. I want to thank again Nick and Craig for sharing their time and insights with us today. Their dedication to improving our city's infrastructure and planning for sustainable growth just shows, I think, where the city is headed. I want to also thank the LaPorte Economic Advancement Partnership. Their commitment to our community's growth and development makes this podcast possible. Visit them at laportepartnership.com to learn about their initiatives and how you can get involved. Thanks again to our producer, Lindsay Kneifel, for your time and efforts on editing and pushing out these episodes to you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us reach more listeners and continue bringing you these important conversations about our community. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll be sitting down with Dr. Sandra Wood to discuss the future of education in LaPorte. Until then, this is Nate Loucks reminding you to stay curious, stay connected, and stay plugged into all things LaPorte. Bye-bye.